Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar on crisis management and insurance challenges in wartime. I'm Tiffaine Beauperin, CEO of FERMA, and I'm thrilled to have you with us. So whether you join us at the FERMA Forum in Madrid last October, or you are tuning in for the first time, you're in the right place to get the latest insights on this critical topic. Since our session in Madrid, the landscape has continued to evolve, obviously. And today we'll catch up you on the latest conflict zones, the emerging maritime security threats, and how global trade and travel are being impacted. Plus, we'll dive into some of the most pressing challenges around medical care in war zones, the complexity of repatriation, and the shifting dynamics of war risk insurance. But why is this topic more important than ever? Geopolitical uncertainties dominate short and medium-term concerns of risk managers, as shown by the results of the FERMA Global Risk Managers Survey. Geopolitical volatility is reshaping crisis management, and the European Commission has put preparedness at the heart of its new mandate. In fact, it's the Belgian Commissioner, Adjal Habib, who is leading the charge on this front, while the Polish presidency of the Council of the EU is making security its top priority. Last October, Sauli Niinisto, former president of Finland, but also special advisor to the European Commissioner, President Ursula von der Leyen, released an important report outlining a stronger EU approach to resilience through better risk identification, enhanced capabilities, and tighter military-civilian cooperation, as well as public-private partnerships. Commissioner Habib is now working on a European Preparedness Union strategy to turn these ideas into actions, focusing on natural disaster and armed conflict. And FERMA is closely monitoring these developments to make sure risk managers are front and center, equipped with the tools they need to navigate supply shocks and keep the private sector resilient and competitive. Today, we are lucky to have Rocco Bozzelli, Head of Global Insurance at MSC Cruises, and a board member of CIRM, the Swiss Risk Management Association, here with us. Rocco will moderate our discussion and introduce our three expert speakers. Before we jump in, just a quick note. We'll have a Q&A session toward the end, so feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A function as we go, because we'd love to hear from you. But now, let's get started. Rocco, over to you.
Thank you, Tiffaine, and welcome to our audience. As Tiffaine said, when we organized the Crisis Management and Insurance Challenges workshop in Madrid last year, we thought, let's hope that we are not going to talk about war anymore. And today we have, again, a totally different scenario. We got many questions from our fellow risk and insurance managers. It's key to be prepared in terms of crisis management, and it's key to know how the insurance market can support those challenges for our risk and insurance manager. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. We have Martina Manca from Europe Assistance. We have David Johnson from International SOS, and we have Frédéric Denefle from Garex, who's also president of IUMI. Our speakers will be able to navigate through those issues with different angles. So from the crisis management and the preparation and the challenges that we are facing, in particular on the maritime transportation from Frédéric's intervention. So I would like to leave the word first to David, who will start our presentation, which again, it's a kind of update from what was presented in Madrid at FERMA. And we will be very happy to hear your questions and to follow up with the Q&A session after our three speakers' interventions. Thank you. I leave the word to David.
Thank you very much indeed, Rocco. Good afternoon to everybody on the call. For those of you who may not be familiar with International SOS, our core business is really about protecting and saving lives of companies' workforce. So I'm very much looking at the crisis angle from the corporate perspective. And when I had the pleasure of addressing the FERMA Forum back at the workshop in October, we had just come off the back of the escalation of the Israeli crisis in spillover into Lebanon, where we had completed 9 charter flights and over 35 ground transportation movements for some 250 personnel from various companies that we support in terms of their workforce. If we could move to the next slide, please. So back in October, I gave a little perspective in terms of how we at International SOS are looking at the various threats and risks of war, mainly at the time, not in the areas that were particularly obvious to everybody, and obviously the most notable one that's missing is Ukraine here. But I thought useful just to see how quickly things have changed. And we looked at what were some of the activities we were monitoring from a now perspective, what were some of the potential threats and risks from the geopolitical sort of tectonic plates changing around us. Thirdly, around how what we call the generational divide was driving potential risk, particularly around civil war. And then lastly, the Earth's finite resources and to what degree was that creating tension. And since October, which in some ways seems a long time ago, but was really only 5 months ago, there hasn't been any what I would call relatively large-scale war-related crises. But I think, as you can see from the little arrows that I've put on from what I talked about in October, we are living in an ever more uncertain and volatile situation. And so green, for the avoidance of doubt, is where we see the situation having relatively improved. Red, we see a deterioration. And orange, we still see a relatively similar level of threat and risk. And I've added a few new conflicts in bold on the left-hand side. Maybe just to cover off firstly, generational divide. This was particularly a threat in 2024, where we saw a phenomenal amount of elections, which was really bringing a highlight of disparity between aging government and prevailing administrations at the time versus a younger population, typically with high levels of unemployment. Fortunately, as the arrows indicate, we've seen this diminish relatively in some of the hotspots we were tracking back in October. And whilst on the right-hand side, the competition for the Earth's finite resources, together with the impacts of climate change and in turn driving mass migration, which drives the threat and risks of conflict, has remained relatively static. I think it's no small coincidence that we see rare earth minerals playing such a key part in the hopefully ensuing Ukraine-Russian peace discussions. So now turning to the left-hand side, and what are we tracking now? So the situations in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Afghanistan, and Pakistan have remained broadly the same, although the Tigray People's Liberation Front activity has certainly increased over the last few weeks, raising the spectre potentially of federal forces intervention and therefore the potential spillover back into Eritrea. And most recently, we've started to see splits emerging within the Taliban within Afghanistan. And so that very much remains on our watch list. In bold there, the West African so-called coup belt, I think, as sure many of you are aware, but we've seen significant activity and requests for assistance from our clients in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with the M23 Rwanda-backed forces pushing very much forward eastwards in Rwanda, from the east, I should say. Two new ones we've added. Obviously, I should mention the US elections, which we foreshadowed in October as potentially leading to civil unrest, thankfully passed off relatively calmly. But Sudan and southern Sudan continue to be escalating with some 14 million people displaced, and very much South Sudan now looking on the brink of a civil war, given the recent actions by various members of the unity government. And then Venezuela and Guyana for people with operations in Latin America, particularly in those locations. We continue to see, as recently as last month, when 6 Guianan border force people were opened fire on, is another example of where continued tensions exist on that border. But probably where the biggest uncertainty since October has arisen, and as no surprise to everybody on this call, is the geopolitical shifting sands. So the new US administration's approach to tariffs and indeed challenging the Article 5 element of the NATO agreement is really unsettling the established norms of the last 80 years. But conversely, from our perspective, in some ways, this is driving improved collaboration, particularly around defense within the European nations. So there is a flip side to the coin there. On the Korean Peninsula, we've continued to see rising tensions. You may well recall back in December where the sudden imposition of martial law in South Korea, and then the North becoming more active, particularly in terms of its deployment of troops in support of the Russian operations in Ukraine. So certainly it is in the geopolitical that we see the biggest change and the continued threat and risk of war. Next slide, please. So what do we do in terms of working with our companies? And this is really around helping them to improve their business resiliency through ensuring an appropriate crisis management framework. And this we have developed over the years, working with thousands of our clients through various crises. And whilst there are many crisis management frameworks, and the wheel on the left hand shows the one that we International SOS use when working with our clients, really just to highlight what we see time and time again as the 4 key elements of an initial and dare I say a successful crisis management approach within an organization, is the ability to diagnose in terms of where your threats and what your relative level of maturity in terms of your crisis management response is, your ability to plan through having an effective structure and being able to respond and recover well from crises as they become the new norm, so to speak, in these days of both perma and poly crisis that we are operating in as global organizations. Thirdly, the ability to train, really making both best use of very practical scenario-based exercises. And then lastly, the continuous learning element of not only responding, but applying any identified lessons back into your crisis management planning from a continuous improvement perspective. So we very much see that as best practice with those 4 key tenets of any effective crisis management plan really being the focus to enable business resiliency. Next slide, please. So that's a bit of the theory, and companies are at various stages of adopting crisis management best practice. So where are some of the very pragmatic starting points that we could recommend to our clients, and indeed some of the areas that highlight particular questions of insurance? So firstly, as I alluded to in the previous slide, scenario modeling. This is really where it starts. It's the ability to really freeform in terms of identifying the threats and risks to your organization and to your business, but also really focusing on what we call the so-called weak signals. So not the obvious one, but what are the weak signals that may well impact your ability to continue to operate as an organization? The second area that we'd recommend is very practical, is what we call addressing the ethical dilemmas up front, to highlight a few examples that we've seen over the last few months and certainly over the last 12 months. So what is your approach as an organization to your national employees and their families? So if you are evacuating your staff, are you going to move your local staff out? And if so, what are you going to do with them when they arrive in a third-party country? And if they are wanting to move their wider families, what is the definition of a wider family? Is it immediate next of kin, or is it all uncles and aunts, and dare I say pets, that we also see quite often as a request for evacuation? We also see companies more and more struggling with the input of employees who are not necessarily directly affected by the crisis, but using social media to request support for family members who may be based in the area of conflict or war. And we saw this recently with a well-known technology company who had an employee who was posting on social media about the need to evacuate their 70-year-old grandparent from their apartment in Khartoum during the Sudan crisis last year. And the third area of ethical dilemma, as we call it, is quite often in times of conflict or war, the right approach is to stand fast. Particularly, this may be imposed where airspace has been closed, or it may be the most appropriate course of action. But what are your company's obligations in terms of provision of food, water, medicines, generators, baby food, or even pet food to these people as they stand fast? We saw this recently in New Caledonia with some of the civil tensions there, where the airport was not operational for several weeks. And a lot of what we were providing customers was support around basic supplies to maintain life while they were standing fast. And then similarly, quite often in a natural disaster, it is about, or in times of conflict, it's about identifying safe havens within a country, because quite often staying within an urban situation is not the best place. But what have you done in terms of identifying potential safe havens outside of the immediate urban areas where your workforce can stand fast prior to any evacuation? The third quick practical area is around decision making, and as it says here, it really is as simple as who owns which decision when. And this, particularly from our experience, comes down to particularly who has the financial authority to make decisions. And in times of conflict and war, when you're looking to move your workforce out of harm's way, quite often commercial airline ticket seats go very quickly. Has the person who's making the decision in your organization got the financial authority to sign off so that those seats can be secured and your workforce safely moved? And then lastly, in terms of developing resiliency beyond the broad principles of effective crisis management, what this means is very practical things around communications. Do you have satellite phones? Do you have alternative means of communicating with your workforce through, say, solutions like Starlink? Because time and time again, we see the biggest challenge for organizations is their ability to locate and account for their workforce. We saw that in Bangladesh recently with the Mexico hurricane, and even more recently, we saw it in the Los Angeles wildfires, where the ability to account and maintain communications with staff was challenging. And does this keeping in contact also extend to welfare checks? And what is your obligations in terms of emotional and psychological support? And do you have service providers who can provide that personal resiliency, very tactical solutions to your teams, your workforce in times of crises? So there, in quick summary, are sort of four very practical areas that we see time and time again in times of war and conflict as challenging organizations' ability to maintain their workforce and their overall operational resiliency. Thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to hand over.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for the update about war risk areas and the perception about the trends in those areas and your view about crisis management approach, in particular on corporate side. And I would like then to leave the word to Martina Manca from Europe Assistance. They operate more on the travel leisure business, and she will give us a different view about how they operate in those crisis situations for their guests. I leave the word to Martina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocco, and hello, everyone. Just a few words on Europe Assistance for the ones not knowing our company. We were born in the 60s, and now we are basically growing up into a big group of 12,000 employees to support millions of people traveling, mainly, as Rocco said, for leisure travel. We have 37 offices worldwide. We manage 200,000 travel medical assistance cases, okay, per year, so quite a lot. We have a lot of in-house medical professionals of every specialty, and we have 29 medical platforms. If we go to the next page, there is the explanation, the insurance part, because we are an insurance company, but we are also an assistance company. So basically, we have this double soul, the soul of insurance, for which we need to really define cost-wise what we cover, okay, on the insurance side when something happens, and then we have the assistance side, so what we can provide to our clients even in this type of scenarios. So from the insurance side, what happens when an incident occurs is that basically we define the impact on the different entities, on how many clients have been impacted in the area of disaster, and we escalate to a global supervision, and we define a response action plan. Basically, on the insurance side, we decide what is covered depending on the type of contracts that we have with our business partner. We define if we need to provide assistance to our business partner. Of course, it depends. We define on an insurance side also some cutoff dates, meaning that, of course, if our clients are there in the area impacted while the incident occurs, is of course something unpredictable, and we usually help in this type of cases. If of course clients go into the impacted area after the incident occurs, of course it's a different scenario because they are exposing themselves to the risk. And so basically we put up a plan not to sell anymore, or also with business partner to cut off the sales for travels with destination that specific area. So this is from the insurance side. From the assistance side, if we go to the next slide, because I want to spend some more time on this, what do we do actually? So in the end, there is a war zone or a disaster zone, okay? It can be one, it can be many, depending on the type of war. So we need really, the difficult part is the flexibility to have all the information to analyze the situation. So if there is one zone, one war zone, that is not accessible to civilians. So if we have some clients in there, we cannot act. We need to wait for local authorities who usually set up a first belt, so an area which can vary, okay, which can vary, where they put all the first triage and first response on the local country, so local authorities, to evacuate people from the war zone. After that, there is the safety zone. The safety zone can vary in shape and in area, okay? And that is the zone where there are the first, let's say, medical facilities selected by local authorities to accueil, to take the evacuated people from the war zone. Those hospitals in the safety zone, depending on the country where it happens, might be also low-level hospital that needs to really face a really difficult situation. They are often overcrowded. Often they cannot offer all types of, let's say, treatments, okay? And according to the type of country where this happens, there might be other hospital, maybe far, okay, a little far from the safety zone, where the people can be evacuated maybe by ground transportation, or according to the local healthcare level, it might be also needed a medical evacuation. For medical evacuation, we need to identify which are the local restrictions, because basically what happens is that when there is a war, the local authorities start to analyze the situation, understand which is the impact, do some damage control, understand what are the other solutions. They may decide also to close the airspace, meaning that nothing can fly in the country. It happened a lot of time, especially for political also unrest. There were many cases. We had some cases also in Ukraine when there was the war outbreak. We had people in Kiev during the bombing, okay? And the problem is that every type of war, every situation is different from one another. So basically, the real skill that needs to be developed is flexibility and training people on different outcomes. Because in the example of Ukraine, the safety zone accessible to insurance company, assistance company, everybody wanting to help was Poland. So basically, we were able to start assisting people at the border with Poland. So it's a little, it's really difficult because every time is different. If we go to the next page, where we try to summarize the main topics that are really challenging for us, of course, we cannot help all the time because we need to be able to communicate. So communication open. We need to have permission to access in at least the safety zone. We can just assist injured people requiring hospitalization or, of course, mortal remains repatriation. We can just coordinate logistic, arrange medical repatriation, evacuation when we can. And what we need to do is to have a very strong crisis management expertise and plan, and also be able to access workforce. Because depending on the impact on number of people, you may need to connect to other entities, and that's why it's important to have a global coordination to be able to access to different people in different entities to manage the crisis. So this is really important. If we go to the next and to the next slide, the difficulty is that the type of conflict is evolving. So basically, we do not have just one type of war. We have different type of warfare. We can also have, as has been mentioned, cyber attacks that are part of an action plan. So really, the most difficult thing is to be able to access to the local current situation, be able to access to resources, local resources, and be able to connect to other country for medical evacuations. So this is on my side. Thank you very much for listening, and I will wait for your question.
Thank you very much, Martina. So it was good to have also your vision and good to know that even if travel insurance is not covering war risks, you are there to assist your clients. I switch now to Frederick from Garex. They are specialized war risk insurers with particular focus on the maritime related war risk exposure, and there's a lot to say about that. I leave the word to Frederick. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rocco. Can you hear me? Yes, I suppose so. So I should thank David and Martina to have introduced the difficult situation that we're facing when it comes to war risks. My company, Garex, is dedicated to ensuring marine war risk to the benefit of ship owners and all cargo owners. And it is fair to say that when we met last October in Madrid, we did remind the audience how difficult it could be to face, when it comes to shipping activities, to face a war zone when you have a vessel attacked whilst transiting into any kind of ocean or any kind of marine transit area. And I did remind how difficult it was for those ship owners to face the situation created by the Houthis attack into the Red Sea. I mean, ship owners had to fear, first of all, and certainly one of the worst situation, fatalities, as long as the crew was in danger. And of course, damages to the property, maybe pollution, all kinds of expenses which could be linked to those difficult situations whenever the vessel could be crippled after an attack. So we were facing a real crisis management situation here, and shipping is a perfect example and the worst scenario maybe that one can have to handle in such situation. I just wanted to add, and you should push maybe on the next slides. Just push the number of attacks we had during a 12 months period, which was released at the very end of November 2024, December 2024. We had more than 100 attacks on those ships, and a lot of losses, and unfortunately 4 fatalities to consider. So we have been facing a situation which we hoped would get better with the ceasefire signed between Israel and Hamas, but unfortunately this proves to come to an end. And we have learned between yesterday and today that fights are coming back on the area, and Houthis have threatened everyone to go back to attacks on ship transiting in the Red Sea as long as they would be linked to Israel, US or UK interests. So maybe on the next slide, we can see what were the consequences of this Red Sea ongoing conflict. And I think that the ongoing conflict that I used during our past presentation in October is still very true today. First of all, the Red Sea transit have been reduced, as you can see on the chart showing the number of transits through the Suez Canal, and shipping industry, shipping operator, ship owner have decided to go around Africa in order to avoid the area, meaning more carry costs, so to say, and more expenses when it comes to shipping cargo from China to Europe or vice versa. That has created longer routes, longer delay for the supply chain. That has to be considered, and some kind of supply chain disruption when it comes to people involved into that kind of trade. Did it create inflation? That was a question in October. We are certainly in a better position now to answer that. It did not create, so to say, inflation, and we didn't face the type of inflation that we have experienced during the COVID crisis, for example, and just after the COVID crisis. But still, the question might be of some interest, and we should see whether, if the Red Sea conflict keeps on, whether we will face inflation at some stage on all those goods and products coming from the rest of the world to Europe and vice versa. On the next slide, what we can add to the October presentation is that we have found that finally, even if in the worst situation is in front of the shipping, I would say, operators, they find some alternative routes, and we have been able to trace that more than 1 million containers have been transshipped in Djibouti in order to escape from the usual Red Sea transit area. Those containers were able to be transshipped one way or another and keep on their routes to the final delivery points on those countries next to the Red Sea. So it shows how flexible the supply chain organization can be, even facing the worst situation. On the next slide, we will see how the marine insurers are reacting towards those very difficult situations in those countries or in those areas. I picked up those 2 situations that we are facing in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf area, as long as one should not forget that we have the same kind of threats with Iran in the vicinity of Persian Gulf when it comes to threat on shipping activities. Whenever we're facing that kind of evolution, marine insurers decide that the area will become a high-risk area. We call it a listed area. And any ship owner, any cargo owner deciding to go and transit through that road should be able to ask a prior agreement to the marine war risk insurers involved into that risk. And this is certainly the key point that one should keep in mind. We are facing a specific agreement which has to be delivered by the marine war insurers before entering into those dangerous areas, so to say. So on the next slide, you will see that Iran threat is still ongoing. Iran has seized several vessels on the last 12 months, 3 tankers and 1 container vessel, and those vessels are still there. I will not enter into detail why those vessels were arrested, but one can understand why the Iran and the Persian Gulf areas are so dangerous to shipping activity. Of course, we should jump to the war crisis that we are experiencing in the Black Sea. And maybe you can jump to the next slide and see that since the Ukraine corridor has been left open under the Ukraine government control during the entire year of 2024, Ukraine was able to ship out a lot of their agricultural product, which has certainly supported their economy. But the threat is still there. And 1 week ago, a vessel loading cargo in Odessa has been attacked and badly damaged, meaning that after 3 years of war, the threat on shipping activity toward this country is still extremely high. And therefore, we should not forget that such a war has strong impact on shipping activity towards and or from Ukraine, even for this country, all the exporters from Ukraine have found alternative routes or alternative supplies chain in order to be able to ship out their cargo. On the next slide, you will see what could be I would say, main question for a very close future for marine insurers. I mean, marine insurers are able, be it on the pure marine risk or on the marine war risk, they are able to back those activities. They are able to back the ship owners and the cargo exporters, even in the worst situation, as we could see in the Red Sea and or in the Black Sea. But the question is, what could they do in case situation would go really sour between China and Taiwan? We just have showed here on those sketches the number of China harbor involved into international trade, and the fact that those Chinese harbor are very close to the Taiwanese straits. And therefore, you can see on the second drawing here the number of vessels which were yesterday going through the Strait of Taiwan. In case we would face the same kind of situation that we have experienced on the Red Sea or on the Black Sea, specifically on the Black Sea, where vessels were stopped when the war started, can anyone imagine the number of vessels which could be hit by such a situation, arrest or blockade of navigation for those vessels in this area? The number at stakes would be huge, not only on the pure number of vessels, but also on the level of cargoes and the volumes of cargo loaded on those vessels. And therefore, this is certainly a case study for marine war risk insurers to be considered for a next future. So what are the takeaways on the next slide that can be kept in mind in order to think about those, I would say, very difficult situation that we have experienced on the shipping activity? First of all, modern conflict have some impacts on shipping, and this is certainly because shipping has been a condition of globalization, meaning that all the modern economy need a shipping lifeline to be open in order for their economy to be able to be dynamic. Second thing, reduced navigation freedom spread to wider crisis. In case of navigation freedom being under threat, it creates condition of a wider crisis, as freedom of navigation is absolutely essential to modern economy and supply continuity. So one can fear that you can have some disturbance when it comes to raw product or first, I would say, needed product, and which would create some tension with the local population or domestic population, or of course create some inflation as well, which could also create some very sour situation domestically. Third point to consider is that anytime there are some crisis on shipping, whether they are a condition, they are the consequences of a warlike situation, sanctions are taken very quickly, and sanctions are trying to hit as much as possible shipping activity, and nowadays more and more insurance and reinsurance activities, meaning that we have to consider that any kind of situation with a crisis, we will have to face those sanctions. I would say those sanctions being decided. Marine insurers can adapt at some stage, and we have seen that when it comes to war risk, marine insurers are prepared to cover against war and protect ship owners and cargo owners. But this comes as a price. More information have to be given, more discussion have to be considered regarding the content of the policies covering those types of condition, and this needs a very great, I would say, cooperation and coordination between marine war insurers and the insured, which are interested into that kind of protection. And of course, the last question, which is still very basic for us, is about China and Taiwan. In case things would go wrong between those two countries, we would face a major disruption, and this would certainly hit very badly all our activities. And as marine insurers, we would have to consider this with a very cautious eye. And I think that with that, I come to the end of my presentation, and we can certainly raise all the questions coming from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frederick. We saw how important is shipping, global trade, and how can be disruptive in terms of supply chain if we face a war situation. Safety, of course, of the crew first and the ship, but of course also the supply chain impact can be very important. So I would like to thank our three speakers to have given those different views about war risk, crisis management and insurance implications. And I ask audience to write the questions if they have. That's the good time to do that. I will start with one first live question we received from the audience, which is about is for Frederick, I will say, is about some underlying tensions growing with China and Russia. An island on the border China was to cover, and it looks that China being active in drone support to Ukraine as well as Russia. So I don't know if you would like to comment a bit also on that angle, Frederick.
Well, we know that there are a lot of cooperation. We know that there are a lot of cooperation between various groups of states behind those war scenes, and we have those information. We don't know how accurate they are. Of course, we do not have any specific crystal ball which would allow us to understand more about those supports given by such or such countries to those countries which are at war. What we have to make sure is that whenever we insure any shipment, we want to make sure that this is not a shipment which is under sanction or which is forbidden under international law or international regulation that we have to apply. And therefore, we try to understand for each of those shipments going to those countries at war that we're not supporting any sanctioned activities or any sanctioned product. This is really where we come to raise specific questions and specific, I would say, information and gathering specific information about those types of commitments and to understand that at least we are not supporting something which would be under sanction.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Let me switch to David, coming back to the crisis management and preparation. One question which came from our audience was about how can companies better prepare to ensure the safety of both foreigners and locals in conflict zones?
Thanks, Rocco. I hope to some degree I covered that question in my presentation, but I would just highlight really two of the messages that I gave based on our experience of supporting companies is firstly around the crisis management planning, and that just starts with the four very simple areas that I highlighted around, if you don't have a fully fledged, just spend your time on the diagnosis of those pertinent threats and risks, have a plan, train your people through effective scenario-based training, and then your ability to respond and continuously folding in lessons learned. That would be my first message. My second message, particularly on the local nationals, is to really think through the so-called ethical dilemmas. And that's particularly around the decision to move staff out of a country which is their home country. I can think in a recent conflict within the last 6 months, we had the general manager of a company locally saying, I want 300 of my local staff moved to a third party country. And then the corporate headquarters based somewhere else in the world was saying, what are you going to do with those 300 local nationals when they arrive in the third party country? And then we watched an internal debate ensue. So you can't solve these types of ethical questions in the time of a crisis. There's just way too much going on to suddenly start having ethical dilemma discussions. And hence, as part of your planning and preparation, really think through, as I said, local nationals, moving them out. What does the definition of family mean, etc.? Those would be my two overriding recommendations to focus on around the movement of people in response to conflict or war.
Thank you very much, David. Let me ask also one question to Martina about how Europe Assistance conducts political evacuations, in the sense, do you coordinate with foreign affairs and governmental body? What is the level of cooperation that your organization needs to have in those kind of situations? It's a question which comes from our audience. Martina, thank you.
Thank you. So basically, of course, we coordinate the local embassy and consulates and the Ministry of Affairs of the country, of the nationality of the clients we are assisting, because it can change, are part of all the operations, because basically they are the ones telling us where we can operate, and they are the ones helping us in the coordination with local authorities. So absolutely yes. And also for all the types of authorization also to evacuate, we coordinate with the Ministry of, let's say, Foreign Affairs of the countries.
Thank you very much, Martina. We have a couple of questions which I would say are more insurance related. One is about the appetite of the marine insurers for war risks. So how the market is going in terms of hardening, softening, and if the data available on the performance of war risk are helping you to basically apply your war risk additional rates. And it's more a question about data on the loss ratio and how basically this line of business performs and how you see basically the war risk insurance market. And I think it's more a question for Frederick here, but I think the unpredictable scenario here doesn't really help to make those assumptions, but I leave the word to Frederick on this.
No, but I'll try to face the challenge. I mean, when it comes to statistics, this is an easy one. There are no statistics when it comes to marine war premium. Okay, we do not have a comprehensive picture of how much premium are paid on the war risk market by the ship owners on the one hand, or by the cargo exporters on the other hand. Okay, so that's the first one. Some markets are trying to do their best to have some kind of insight on this, but when it comes to the world marine insurance on a worldwide basis, we do not have any specific statistics. When it comes to the appetite, one can say that when it comes to marine war risk, it is quite fair to say that it will always, as long as you do underwrite the risk with ordinary risk insurers, the pure marine risk, so to say, marine risk insurers will try as much as possible to find a solution to back the ship owner when it comes to war risk. And this is where each market will have some kind of solution. There is a Norwegian solution for ship owners. There is a French solution for the ship owners who are interested into buying marine risks with France, and this is the same type of scenario for various markets. When it comes to the appetite, so to say, being prepared to underwrite war risk per se, some markets are quite active at some stage, as in some situation, but they are also very quick to get out of the market whenever threats are becoming too harsh or becoming really too difficult to manage. But what we can say after 3 years of war in the Black Sea and 1 year and some weeks of war in the Red Sea is that marine war insurers have always been there to cover some aspect of the risk at some stage. Of course, this has some impact on price. This has some impact on the content of condition. But I think that the various markets have been able to answer and to back up some of those shipments.
Thank you very much, Frederick. You took the challenge. Thank you very much. We have a number of questions, but we are running a bit out of time, so I'll try to combine in one question a couple of questions we received, which is basically what can corporate headquarters, in what way we can issue a travel guidelines if we have exposure in high-risk geographies, and how artificial intelligence could be used to improve the risk assessment, scenario analysis, and risk mitigation response. So I leave to our speakers to decide who wants to pick this one, but it's basically, again, we come back to crisis management preparation, and I'm sure that AI can help in that. Maybe Martina, you want to pick that one?
Yes,
or
if
David?
you want. For sure. So basically, I think that AI could be very useful to analyze and identify schemes in the past, let's say, in what we do day by day, and in this type of crisis management scenarios, and can help in a better preparation. Because then we know in my area, in assistance, it's quite unpredictable what happens and the things you need to face. But at least in the preparation, you can identify some schemes with AI for sure. So that's what I would answer.
Thank you, Martina. Don't know if David, you would like to add something. Then I think we are running out of time.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we are already using AI enablement, so to speak, in how we provide services to support clients in two areas. So firstly, we use it as part of the scanning for threats that we ultimately alert our clients on. And I use that word cautiously. We use it for the scanning because then we do the verification. Because the last thing any of our clients needs are false positives or hallucinations, of which there has been many well-documented examples. And typically managers and people responsible for crisis response within our clients, don't appreciate further noise and confusion. So it has a role in terms of helping to really sift through the large array of information around situational awareness, but it does rely on human oversight to make sure that it's calibrated. The second area is we're increasingly using it as part of a knowledge base around really looking at prior incidents, what has been the impact, and building a much more knowledge-centric response capability in how we support clients. And then thirdly, as I think a few of the panelists we were discussing earlier, is the point around the importance of training through scenario-based. Clearly, AI is a very powerful tool to build some really highly interactive scenarios that you can run as part of your crisis management team exercise to really make it a truly interactive and sort of multimedia, multidimensional experience, which will really put your management teams under pressure, but create a very real-life simulation. So those are three areas. Two practically we're using, and the third one is something that I would recommend to anybody feeling that they need to dust off the practicing and training of their crisis management plans.
Thank you very much, David. I think we have given some thoughts to our risk and insurance management community here. The topic is such a wide topic that we would require more time, but I would like to thank our three speakers for their insights and their participation. And let me leave the word to Tiffaine now. And I thank you again for your participation and the audience for the interest about this workshop.
And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. So a huge thank you to you, Rocco, for the great moderation, and to our amazing speakers for having shared, your experience and insights. So Martina, David, Frederic, a huge thank you. I hope you all found the session informative and you've been left with some valuable takeaways. So just a quick reminder, you receive the replay of this webcast within the 24 hours. So keep an eye in your inbox. And before we sign off, I'd like to share with you an exciting piece of news. So this year's FERMA flagship event is the European Risk Management Seminar taking place on the 23rd and the 24th of October in Zurich. It's an exclusive event for risk and insurance managers, and we'll be deep diving into the broadening horizon of the value chain and what it means for risk management. So registrations are now opened. Make sure you secure your spots as places are limited. Thank you once again for joining us today. We truly appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.